He is released and moves to Rochester, New York, and this became his playground.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at 10 examples of highly disturbed and dangerous people who were voluntarily let out of prison.
And for the past 2 years, she has reportedly lived in this suburb south of Montreal with her husband and their 3 children.
Harvey Marceline.
I take full responsibility for what I did. I have understanding now of what I did, and I'm a changed person.
It's not often that someone kills 2 people and is let out of prison both times, but that's what happened with Harvey Marceline. Back in 1963, Marceline was convicted of murdering an ex-girlfriend and received a life sentence.
But while behind bars, the sentencing laws changed, and Marceline told a 3-panel parole board it will never happen again.
Marceline was also continuously denied parole owing to violent and aggressive behavior in prison. However, after serving more than 21 years, Marceline was released in May of 1984. Just 1 year after release, Marceline committed a second homicide, killing Anna Miranda and disposing of her remains around Central Park. Marceline was convicted of the crime and re-entered prison, but was released yet again in August 2019. And yet again, Marceline committed murder, killing Susan Layden in February 2022 at the age of 83.
This is just the latest of a list of heinous offenses conducted over a period of a lifetime by Miss Harvey, and we can only hope that she can do no more.
Edmund Kemper.
Saying I'd wanted to kill my mother since I was 8 years old, and I'm not proud of that.
Even as a young man, Ed Kemper was very disturbed. Following a difficult upbringing with his mother, Kemper was sent to live with his grandparents on their California ranch. However, his mistreatment continued under them, festering further resentment. On August 27, 1964, that resentment exploded, and Kemper murdered both of his grandparents.
It started coming to a head again, so I went back down. I ran away back down there. And then a month later, I'm up living with my grandparents in the mountains, and 10 months later, I murdered them.
Being just 15 years old, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and placed inside the maximum security Atascadero State Hospital. While not a traditional prison, Kemper remained inside until his 21st birthday in 1969. Against the advice of the hospital psychologists, Kemper was released on parole and into the care of his mother. He would later murder his mother along with 7 others in his famous crime spree of the 1970s.
She said for 7 years, she said, I haven't had sex with a man because of you, my murderous son. So I got a claw hammer and I beat her to death.
Raymond Eugene Brown. 14-year-old Raymond Eugene Brown wanted some cleats, so on October 1st, 1960, he broke into the home of some relatives intending to steal money. When confronted by his aunt, he stabbed her 123 times with a kitchen knife and then murdered his grandmother and great-grandmother. Brown's mother found the bodies the next day and called the police, leading to Raymond's arrest. Despite the severity of his crimes, Brown was a model prisoner and was paroled in 1973. However, this was revoked in 1980 after Brown attempted to kill his landlord. Nevertheless, he was granted parole again in 1986. Less than a year later, Brown murdered his live-in girlfriend and her young daughter. He was convicted once more and died on death row in 2008. David Edward Moust. At just 9 years old, David Edward Moust was institutionalized at his mother's request, who claimed that he exhibited dangerous behavior. Indeed, after enlisting in the Army, Moust killed teenager James McClister and was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, receiving a 4-year sentence at Fort Leavenworth. He specifically asked not to be paroled but was released in 1977. He then murdered 3 more people and was eventually given a 35-year sentence, but with credit for time served and good behavior, he was released in June 1999. This once again contradicted Moust's request not to be paroled, and once again he murdered another 3 people after being released. Moust was finally given a life sentence, but he took his own just 1 month after sentencing. Kenneth McDuff.
On a hot summer night in Texas, 3 teenagers are hunted and slaughtered. The killer is sentenced to die and then set free.
Sometimes called the Broomstick Killer, Kenneth McDuff worked with an accomplice named Roy Green. In August 1966, Duff and Green abducted 3 teenagers near Fort Worth, Texas. He shot the 2 boys, then proceeded to sexually assault the surviving girl before strangling her with a broomstick, earning him the moniker. He was sentenced to death in 1968, but just 4 years later, the Supreme Court commuted many death sentences, including McDuff's, to life in prison. And then in 1989, after serving 21 years, McDuff was released.
How can this serial killer get out of prison? How could he have been on death row and make parole?
He got by with murder. He could do it again.
The parole board supposedly believed that he could still contribute to society. They were wrong. Almost immediately after his release, McDuff began killing again and is believed to have murdered at least 6 further victims.
The general reaction was, how on earth could this man get out? This is the Broomstick Killer. And if anyone should be executed, it should be him.
Jack Unterweger.
A convicted murderer set free only to kill again. Jack had not been redeemed at all. Jack was still this psychopathic killer.
In 1974, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger took Margaret Schaefer into the woods and killed her in a particularly brutal fashion. While in prison, Unterweger began writing an autobiography, along with poems, short stories, and articles. These writings actually garnered acclaim from Austrian literary critics, and they campaigned for his release, believing that they exhibited traits of personal transformation and rehabilitation.
A very important Austrian journalist named Gunther Nenning, he took an interest in Jack Unterweger and the possibility that Jack could be an example not only of a literary artist but of a violent offender who was successfully rehabilitated.
But they misinterpreted the writings as being deep and remorseful self-reflection, when in reality they were more performative, even manipulative. But the pressure worked, and Unterweger was released on parole in 1990 after serving 15 years. Unfortunately, he was most definitely not rehabilitated, and Unterweger murdered at least 11 more women between 1990 and 1992.
It was immediately apparent to me that this was a person with a very quick intellectual grasp, someone who could think very quickly, who spoke very well, who had strong manipulative powers over everyone who listened to him.
Arthur Shawcross.
He went through each and every one of them and gave his account of how he killed each one of them.
Professor of psychiatry Dr. Michael Stone called the case of Arthur Shawcross one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. The story dates back to 1972 when Shawcross committed 2 heinous murders in Watertown, New York. Under the conditions of a highly controversial plea deal, Shawcross was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole.
You meet a prostitute on the street, it's like a kid in a candy store, right?
Said parole occurred just 14 years later when Shawcross was released in 1987. Following his release, Shawcross settled in Rochester and began a new killing spree within a year. Between 1988 and 89, Shawcross murdered at least 12 more women. He was eventually caught and sent back to prison, where he died from cardiac arrest in 2008.
After I admitted to the 11, it was like a big weight fell off me. And then one detective asked me, if you had to do it over again, what would you do? I said, I'd put them all in one hole and you'd never find them.
Karla Homolka.
I do know, however, that women and men are equally capable of doing evil and doing wrong, and that in this particular instance, I'm not so certain that that fact was appreciated.
Working with her then-husband, Paul Bernardo, Karla Homolka committed 3 murders in the early 1990s. 2 victims were kidnapped off the street and murdered. The third was Karla's own sister, Tammy, who they drugged and sexually assaulted.
Christ, she should have been out an hour ago.
20 is too much.
Don't worry, it's not gonna hurt her.
Tammy ultimately died by choking on her own vomit. Homolka then entered one of the most controversial plea deals in criminal history, dubbed the deal with the devil by the Canadian press. She effectively fooled prosecutors, making them believe that Bernardo was the driving force behind the crimes and that she was an unwilling participant. As a result, Homolka was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to only 12 years in prison. She was released in 2005 and has lived free ever since.
When Homolka was released, she had served her full sentence. She was free to start a new life and choose where she wanted to live.
Like it or not, she has the right to live her life like any other person without being subject to threats and harassment.
Leslie Van Houten.
Susan Atkins and Leslie Van Houten. Case number A-253156, Department 104. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Charles Manson, guilty of the crime of murder of Abigail Folger in violation of Section 187, Penal Code of California, of felony as charged in count 1 of the indictment, and we further find it to be murder of the first degree.
One of the most famous members of the Manson family, Leslie Van Houten was convicted for her role in the LaBianca murders, which occurred just 1 day after the infamous Tate killings. She was originally sentenced to death, but this was later commuted to life in prison after the California Supreme Court invalidated the state's death penalty. She then served over 50 years in prison, her parole being repeatedly denied.
The 73-year-old had been serving a life sentence after she was convicted for the gruesome killings of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca in 1969. Her parole request had been rejected 5 other times amid family members' outrage at the possibility she could walk free.
That is until 2023. An appeals court argued that Van Houten was no longer a danger to society and she was released on parole at the age of 73. Her release sparked a range of reactions, from supporters who argued about the virtues of reform to opponents who were left in disbelief at her release.
I really do not believe that anyone who kills 2 people, and especially having in such a brutal manner, should ever be let out of prison.
Before we continue, Be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Pedro Lopez.
The captain was stunned. It seemed impossible that one man could have carried out so much violence. If Lopez was telling the truth, he'd rank among the most prolific serial killers in history.
Pedro Lopez murdered at least 110 people between 1969 and 1980, although he confessed to over 300. Ecuador does not impose life sentences, and in 1980, the maximum was just 16 years. So that's what Lopez got. However, he was considered a model prisoner and was released 2 years early, in 1994.
On August 31st, 1994, serial killer Pedro Alonso Lopez was released from the Garcia Moreno prison after serving 14 years of a 16-year sentence. He was released 2 years early for good behavior.
Following his release, Lopez was deported to Colombia and admitted to a mental hospital. He stayed there until 1998 when he was declared sane and released. He has led a quiet life ever since, although a number of murders that occurred in the 2000s bear similarities to his MO, leading many to believe that he continued his killing spree.
He went back into the countryside he knew so well, to the killing ground where he had found so many victims. That was the last time anyone reported seeing Pedro Alonso Lopez.
Can you think of any other shocking examples? Let us know in the comments below.
Many questioning how Marceline was free in the first place.